All right. Hey, ICSV. I am here with a good friend of mine and my old college roommate,
Right.
actually. I'm here with
That's right.
Pastor James Hobson. All right.
Hey, what's
Pastor.
going on? How y'all doing?
Hey, James, tell us just quickly, like, where are you? Like, where are you from? And yeah.
Yeah, so born and raised in a small city called Lynchburg, Virginia. It's also where I went to college, where I went to seminary as well, but went to college with yourself in at Liberty, which is also right here in Lynchburg. And I pastor a church called Hill City Community Church. It is a multi-ethnic church. I would call us a young church, not only young in age in terms of us being only like 4 years old, but also a lot of college students who worship with us, and formerly the professor who, I piloted and created our urban ministry program at Liberty University, and just recently left just to pastor full time and really, make a meaningful impact in our city and our community.
Yeah, that's great. So we're starting to do these videos because we're here on lockdown in Vienna. And I really wanted to talk to you. I wanted our students to hear from you. Not only because you're a pastor, but because really like meeting you and getting to know you really kind of shaped who I am in a lot of ways. You really challenged me in a lot of ways. And I think your story can bring a lot to the table, and you can do the same for our students. So I wonder, could you just share for just a minute or two, what's your like faith story, like
Yeah.
how has God worked in your life? And not only that, like, how has it changed over the years? Like, how have you seen God kind of molding you and shaping you, from when you first became a Christian all the way up until now?
Yeah. All right. So am I talking this is middle school and high school?
This is just high school, really, primarily. High schoolers, yeah.
All right. Yeah. First of all, it's tough being in high school. I do not want to go back. Yeah. Those things I've left behind me. No, I'm kidding. Why do I even want to start there about it's difficult being in high school? Like it is in America. I don't know what it's like in Europe, but in America, they say the phrase like sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. It's like the biggest lie you've ever heard, right? But it's this idea of like I remember so I played a lot of sports in high school. Our high school was pretty big. We were good in sports. I won a state championship, but also like what comes with that and my faith is like this idea of like, I didn't realize that when the scripture talks about like, there are things that you can live for in this world and there are things you can live for with God's kingdom. I never thought that would really impact me. I thought it was just stuff preachers said. And I remember being in high school, we won a state championship. No. We won a state championship indoor track. It's outdoor season. There's this kid on the team, and he's like mildly mentally challenged. I hope I'm being politically correct. Don't know what the appropriate term would be, right? So he in track and field, you wear they call them spikes, but it's these shoes that got these, like teeth on the bottom, so you really grip the track. You're going faster. He wasn't wearing them when he was supposed to. You're supposed to wait until you get on the track. And so we're in the locker room, and he's wearing them now because he just got them, and they're new. And he's slipping all over the place. And people are laughing at him. Like my actual friends were laughing at him. And they kind of got a joke out of it. And one of the guys just goes over and just keeps pushing him over. So obviously he can't stand up because he keeps slipping. And they're just kicking him. They're laughing at him. They're kicking him, laugh at him. And he's like, man, guys, get off me, get off me, get off me. All right, so in that moment, I saw an opportunity for a follower of Jesus in the world, in high school, to like really speak up, like, hey, get off him, like, stop, quit doing it. Now all my friends were doing it, all the popular kids were doing it. And my only rationale was like, well, God, I'm not pushing him. Right? God, I'm not kicking him. It gets worse. They keep kicking him. They push him into a locker. He starts crying and they start calling him names. And then we go out to track practice. He's going out and he doesn't say anything to the coaches. Nobody says anything. And we just go on as life is. I go back to that phrase I said earlier, sticks and stones, when we're calling this guy names, we're doing all this stuff. And it's like, this is high school. And for me, Now I know your school is awesome. They love Jesus, and there, none of those issues would ever exist there. But I know for me in high school, it was, well, if I want to be popular, I need to be a jerk. I need to be pushing people down, people who can't defend themselves, people who are getting ganged up on. That's what I have to do. But I felt so terrible on the inside. And I knew this was the Spirit of God, because nothing of that was Christ-like. Nothing of that represented the kingdom. And so for me, this is at a time where I'm starting to go to church for my own. I'm starting to read the Bible on my own. And it was like, I thought I wanted Jesus, but now that I want Jesus, it's like everything about his kingdom is so counter cultural to my world. It was like in church, I want Jesus, but in the real life, I'm like, I kind of want you, Jesus. I'm like, I want you from the sidelines,
Yeah.
And to this day, I remember it like it was yesterday. And I think the Lord won't let me forget it, because it's a little bit of shame in that moment of I chose popularity. I chose the crowd. And this guy, it's like, actually, we were the punks. We were the ones, and I include myself in that because I didn't do anything. I didn't say anything. And so I don't know what equivalent that would look like for your school. I know we're separated, but who's sitting alone at the lunch table? Who's, whatever, whoever that other person is, who doesn't have the coolest, whatever, this or that. Man, Jesus doesn't care about none of that. He cares about his kingdom and about, I think that in that moment, God would have been most glorified in me dying to myself and me standing up for this individual, right? I ain't have to quote a scripture verse, didn't have to start praying, but I should have said, hey man, pick on somebody who can fight back and stop picking on him, or get off him. And God, if I get another opportunity, I'm gonna live in a way that honors you and that models you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. We're actually, so in our middle school chapel groups this week, we were talking a little bit about bullying and things like that. But we've got this video that we're using, and they kind of talk about the same thing, but they call it the bystander effect. So basically, you might not have been the one, picking on that kid or whatnot, but because nobody else was stepping up and saying anything, you don't do it. And I think that problem, I think it's a universal thing, man. I don't think that's a Lynchburg problem. That's not a James Hobson problem. That's a universal thing. And I think we see that where we are. But I'm curious, do you think it's actually possible, for a high school student to step up and start to, live out their faith, even in a society, in a world that kind of might be anti-Christian or post-Christian, or kind of oh, that stuff's that's not for us. Come on.
Oh man, I think it's the perfect time. I think it's an absolute perfect time, because if I'm talking to a room full of high schoolers, it's so many unique things happening in high school and early college too. It's they call you young adults, right? They don't call you adults. They call you young adults, which is this idea of you're starting to rationalize the world. You're starting to figure things out. You're starting to determine things for yourself. You're starting to have your own experiences to where it's not just mom and dad said this or that. I'm starting to figure out the world. And now with my faith and this idea of my peers all around me, there's even these passages in the New Testament that talks about you have to work out your soul's salvation in fear and in trembling. And for a high schooler, one of the things that would have helped me out as one who was, I would say, new, if not lukewarm, the thing that would have helped me out the most wouldn't have been another speaker, wouldn't have been another pastor, professor. It actually would have been peers saying, I want to live for Jesus, because I'm also thinking about I'm starting to get fit. I mean, I'm starting to become attractive. I'm starting to become whatever. I'm the man. I'm the stuff. I'm I'm starting to get faster. So me living my best life, but for Jesus, that would have radically changed everything for me. Not seeing an adult do it. Of course, adults do that because you're old and you're old and gray and you're lame, right? But for somebody who's I'm in the best shape of my life, with the most opportunities in my life, and I'm going to lay it all down because the greatest treasure in my life is actually coming to know Jesus and him radically changing my life. I think, you know, for those of you who are saved, those of you who know Jesus, you might not realize, like, you're probably the biggest influence over your non-Christian peers, more than their parents, more than your parents, because you're living day to day with them, and you have a chance to, I think, model something unique, you know, that others, you know, don't have to offer, you know.
Yeah, definitely. So did you know, I'm just curious, when did you know you were going to be a pastor? Like, were you in high school going through some of this stuff thinking, hey, one day I'm going to be a preacher and I'm going to talk about this stuff? Or like, when did that come about? You know, like, how'd that happen?
Yeah, I've been wanting to do this my whole life. I've been saying, when I was 15, I want to wear a robe and a clergy coat. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. No, never thought I would be a pastor preacher. And for me, like, it never even crossed my mind that was even an occupation I wanted. I went to college, and for me, I wasn't the first one in my family to go to college, but I was the first one in my immediate family to graduate from college. And I honestly didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I was supposed to go to college. People say go to college. It sounds like the thing to do. I actually got rejected from my first college, got accepted to my next like 3. Liberty happened to be like that last one in the bunch. And that's all. I mean, we're talking about young adults here. That also was a question that brought me a ton of anxiety, by the way. This is totally random, but I don't know if it's a thing in the Black community that all my aunts and grandmas and whatever wanted me to be, or if it's a thing just for young adults, period. But I would constantly get the question, hey, all right, when you go to college, what are you gonna major in? What do you want to do? What are you gonna be? And so I'm ashamed to say this, but after a while, I would just start lying and just to see what would get the best response. So I remember lying. I was like, hey, I'm going to be a doctor. And they were like, hey, that's a lot of school, you know, but it wasn't like, that's great. So I was like, let me try something. I was like, hey, I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a lawyer. And they're like, a lawyer. Oh my gosh. And so I remember I never knew anything about law school or pre-law. So I said stuff to really just get people off my back, but I was kind of lost, man. Like, I don't know what I want to do. You'll graduate high school and you're just kind of like, what's next? I mean, I guess I'll go to college, I'll major in a thing. So I was pretty kind of, ambiguous in all of that. And, if you ask me more, maybe I can go more into how I became a pastor, but specifically, I never had that intent, never had that desire. When I really started trying to follow Jesus, it really wasn't about being a pastor. It was just about following Jesus. And just, I'm learning so much about my life because I had to unlearn so much about life.
Yeah.
Like everything I was living for was the exact opposite of the kingdom. Like they're total opposites. And so like, again, I might not have had that same opportunity with that one, guy who we were picking on, but I have had multiple opportunities, not as a pastor, just as a normal follower of Jesus, where the Holy Spirit is moving, he's talking to you, he's telling you to evangelize or do various things, and God is showing up in my life. And I'm just like, man, forget about being a pastor. I just want more of him. I just like, I'm just enamored by Jesus.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to ask you maybe some challenging questions. All right. So when I first met you, I remember just kind of like recognizing how different we were in so many different ways. And one of those ways was when it came to faith, right? Like when I came to Liberty, I remember thinking, oh, like I'm going to Liberty, everybody's going to think like me there. Everybody's going to believe like me there. And then you and I ended up together, and I'm like, oh my goodness, like, is this guy even a Christian? Like, but what I found, and it was stupid, like there was no reason to think that, but like we thought different about like prophecy or speaking in tongues or, healing, whatever, like a lot of that like science stuff. And so like you really challenged me. And what happened is I was forced to really think about what I believe and why. So one of the things that we do at our school, one of the things that I really try and do in my classes, and really all of our teachers try and do, is get kids to kind of ask the question why, and try and figure out why they believe the things that they believe, why they practice the things that they practice. And one of the biggest questions that I think we face and that I think young people face today is the question, like, why Christianity, right? Like, why?
Mm-hmm.
So like for
Mm-hmm.
you, like, what is it about Christianity? What is it about Jesus that
Mm-hmm.
makes you want to follow him and know him more? What is it about Jesus that makes you want to be a pastor and want to lead people to follow him, as opposed to a different religion, right? Like, why should a kid
Mm-hmm.
come to Christianity,
Yeah.
come to Christ, and not something else?
Yeah, man, that's a fantastic question. And I think it's even funny, like reflect, like when I think back of college, uh, I would love to even talk more about even like prophecy, tongues, all this stuff.
Yeah.
It's funny, like even thinking back on it. But I mean, for me, I won't answer the question, but I think I even want to come back to even some of that stuff because I think it's even value in, like, yes, college classes, but just like having a roommate, like you're living with somebody who, like, they're functioning out of their worldview. They're not actively thinking about stuff. They're just like functioning. They're just living. And I think that's really interesting. But for me, like, why Christianity? When I think about why Christianity for me and my context, especially with all the racial stuff that happened this summer and stuff that happened before, I also think about why Christianity from my lens as a Black male in America, and also like cousins, family members of mine who are like, why that white man's religion of Christianity as well. And so, like, for many Black people of faith, who have a faith in some form of a God, many of them have left Christianity because of a lot of the racial overtones or racial issues. So for me, when I think about why Christianity, I think about a religion that is not only like spiritual, but I also think about one that I really, and it might sound counterintuitive, but for me, I think about science and I think about history. And I think about truth, I think about facts. When I think about my faith, as opposed to even some of these newer cults that are coming up, and I don't have much time to talk about the Black Hebrew Israelites or the Moors or some of these, like, there are like so many branches off that have even come, like the nations of gods and earths, and a lot of New Age and like African mystical religions. So much has happened because of race in the church that people are still clinging to some form of spirituality, but like the Bible and Christianity has no merit to it. So for me, like, I need a Christianity scientifically and historically, probably more historically than scientifically, that says like Jesus and Christianity predates white supremacy. Like, it's just facts. And so though Europeans in the transatlantic slave trade like force a religion upon a people and use slavery to conduce that, just because it was used negatively doesn't mean that Jesus himself, there's anything wrong with him. When I think about like history, I think about like people are like this, right? Peers and cousins, actual cousins who are like, man, get away from Christianity. That's and I'm just trying to be as authentic. I hope I'm not offending anybody, but just trying to. And so like, they're like, why would you, get down with this white, Jesus and blonde hair and blue eyes? And I go, actually, he was from the Middle East, right? And I'm just like, this guy, right, is not even European at all, right? And this faith that he's talking about is more ancient than that. He's actually Jewish, right? He's Hebrew. And so for me, like, those type of facts are something that I needed in my faith, because as I'm engaging with people who are really wrestling with the fact that, like us, like, there are three major denominations, even in America, that have split off and formed other denominations just to continue on in slavery. Like, we had Baptists, but the only reason that there's a sect called Southern Baptists is because these pastors broke off because they were saying like, hey, people are talking about abolition and ending slavery. The Bible's okay with slavery, right? A bad hermeneutic, which I don't have time to dive into. And they're like, you can't convince me why slavery's wrong. They're helping our economy, yada, yada, yada. We should own slaves. And so they formed the Southern Baptist Convention for the sole purpose. And so Blacks getting saved there, later from that, who know this and remember this, like, why would I follow Jesus? Why would I follow Christianity and that? And I needed faith that I could say, because Jesus, right, is truth, like Jesus. And I have a faith where it's like, I don't just hear about some mystical random place. It's like Jerusalem, I can find it on a map. And I know that in this map, Jerusalem is housed in Israel. Some people call it Palestine, but that is also housed in this peninsula that's surrounded by Saudi Arabia and Yemen and Oman and Jordan. And so it's like, this is my faith. You know what I mean? Like, and even to some of the claims of Jesus, like Romans got death right. They're gonna kill people by a cross, crucifixion. It's brutal, it's gruesome, but it's like, they're not gonna botch a death. He dies. And then we have evidence of people, you know, as many as even 500 brothers at one time who said, and yes, he died, but I also saw the same guy who died by Roman crucifixion 3 days later. I need some of that type of evidence, because you just can't pray away everything. Like, I got doubts. I can't be like, I'm gonna pray. It's like, I need a solid answer, a legitimate answer when culture is telling me, you know, the opposite. So that's why Christianity for me.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? You following any of that?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So you bring up, you talk a lot about race there and like the Black church and things like that. That's a hot topic, right? 2020 has been full of crazy things happening. But it's been really interesting, right? Like back with, you know, George Floyd and some of those other big situations that happened in the States, but they've really gained, you know, worldwide, you know, publicity and attention and things like that. And we've sat down and we've had conversations with our students about racial justice. And, you know, I think there's racism and racial issues really worldwide. They just might look a little different here than they do there. So I'm curious, we were actually, just before we got locked down, we had been planning like a mini series in chapel to talk about racial justice and like how we as Christians should respond, and how we, even just as human beings, should learn to, you know, treat other human beings the way that we would want to be treated, or the way that they deserve to be treated. So I'm curious, as a Black man, as a Black pastor, as a leader, what kind of things, I guess, one, are you doing to try and kind of raise awareness within your congregation and your community? But also on the flip side, like, what would you say to, you know, our group of high school students, right? 120, 130 kids, different nationalities, different ethnicities. Like, what is the big thing to know right now? Or what is the big thing even to do as a young high school student?
Yeah, man. You know what was crazy? Tim, or Pastor Tim, I don't know what your title is there, director of spiritual things. You know what's crazy is like I think that like we have we have adopted, I think, cultural sins into our faith. Everybody has that, like that we call them blind spots for a reason. Like, because I can't see what's directly behind my head. And so we have to regularly like have the prophetic voice of, and by prophetic, I mean like people who speak the truth. And it's going to be painful and it's going to hurt. It's going to make you feel bad, because it'll just help expose some of those things. And when you mention this idea of like globally, like one of the things I think I've noticed, like in trying to like not just use America as an example, like United States, but like my wife is Hispanic, and like I've been around some Hispanics, and one thing that I've seen, and they might disagree with me, but it's what I've seen. I felt like, as people talk about national Hispanic pride, the Mexicans are like the lesser than. It's like, you're like, oh, you're Mexican, and they might disagree with that, but I've also been around like some like Korean American, and it'll be like a little something about Japanese. I'm like, excuse me, you know, and there is a little bit of that. There's some history there or something. And I want to say, like, for the American church, if you are not, if you're not in a city like New York, Miami, or Los Angeles, and you're in a church building, it's only going to be one skin color. Now, it might be some speckled thoughts there, but if there are other colors, they're also the same person, meaning they vote the same, they listen to the same music, they live in the same neighborhood, they work in the same, and it's this idea of like, we've allowed, like, I think the sins of our fathers to now visit the children, where I don't know a pastor right now, personally don't know a pastor who would say, if you're white, you can't come here because we're a Black church. If you're Black, you can't come here because, but we've lost the idea of like, I have become to reach my neighbors. Like there's this passage in the New Testament, Paul is like, man, we got Jews, we got Greeks. And by Greeks, it just means Gentile people who are not Jewish. And he's like, these people are over here still talking about circumcision. These people are uncircumcised. And he steps into every space saying, right, I'm going to lay down whatever preference I have because I just want to become like the Jew so I can win Jews. I want to become like the Greeks to win the Greeks. And then he's like, I'm not even going to save everybody. I just want to save some. And I think we've lost that in the American church. It's this idea of like, hey, we like our Tomlin music. And it's like, well, I like gospel. And it's like, well, I don't care that you like gospel. There are churches for you if you want that. I'm going to keep going on with Tomlin. And I think that little piece of being kind of self-centered, even in worship, is just, I think, just kind of lingering embers of like people doing it and not even realizing it, just not even aware. And so for us, our church is truly a diverse and multi-ethnic church, Black, white, whatever. And so, what that looks like for us. So I'm Black, right? I think about my lens is all Black, but for us, we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. And this is a time where we bring people who are Spanish speakers, as well as people who were either foreign born or might be born here in the US, but have Hispanic roots. And we sing worship songs in Spanish for a whole month, not a Sunday, not a song on a Sunday, but challenging our English speakers who are sucking at trying to translate some of these worship lyrics. But then what begins to happen is they begin to have a little more compassion over the person who's a native Spanish speaker who's struggling with English. And now it's like, oh man, you laugh at them or you joke at them because they can't speak English well. And it's like, well, they know freaking 2 to 3 languages. You only know one.
Yeah.
And so it really has challenged and pushed our body. Not only that, we've also celebrated Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And we don't celebrate every month on the calendar. We really just celebrate what's represented within our church. Mm-hmm. So we have a large Asian or Pacific Islander population. Hey, help us worship the Lord together in rich and new ways. And is that making sense?
No, that's really good. But what about, so we've got, like I said, we've got high school kids. Our school is represented by students from over 60 different nations. So the question that I would have is, we've got students who want to be involved in, I don't know how to phrase it, I guess, like fighting against racial injustice or fighting against racism. Like, are there things in your opinion, like, do you think like, okay, you as a, 16, 17, 18-year-old high school student, like, this is what you should do? I don't know. I guess I don't know exactly what I'm thinking, but like,
what can you do, or what should they do?
Yeah, like organizationally, like, are there like organizations they should partner with, or like, are there just individual things they could do? Are there things we as a school could do?
Wow. Man, I honestly want to say a couple things to that. Number one, I do think a place like your school with that type of representation, you're ahead of the curve, man. Like, my gosh, like when we think about Liberty, and I'm proud of Liberty and glad I went there. But I'm about to knock it for a little bit, but it's like that representation is not what you would even experience with an average Christian education in America. Like, people of different ethnicities, different views, any of that. It's like, no, it's a cookie cutter. Like I'm gonna mention all terms that have nothing to do with Jesus, but it's our Christians. It'll be like, I vote Republican, and I live in the suburbs, and my family is middle class or above. If I went to a public school, it was a nicer public school, or I went to a preppy Christian school. I didn't want to mention faith, private school. And it's like all these things have defined our faith. And so for you guys, I think to be honest, at your school, it was probably a lot easier to jump in on the racial conversation because it's just so normal, or the diversity conversation, where in other places, they're still trying to wonder, like, do I mention this? Do I speak up? And it's like, you guys are light years ahead just because of what you've experienced. And I would say, do you get involved? Do you get involved? The answer is yes. Like if you've noticed anything from Gen Z, and I won't even say millennials, because millennials now old. Millennials are probably 25 to 39. I don't know where that age range is, but when we started hearing a lot of school shootings that happened, it was like high schoolers who grabbed the nation's, like, and specifically in the U.S., attention, like the use of hashtags, like the hashtag Black Lives Matter or the hashtag all these things, like no one had a political title, no one was a president, no one was a world leader, no one was a prime minister. It was just the voice of the youth saying, we're not gonna take it, right? We're gonna say something, we're gonna speak up. And I think that if there are youth there and they're like, man, I feel like I wanna do something, I think you don't realize how much power you have in a collective voice that can, make meaningful change. I think that you can do something. I think you do have a voice. But I would also say, like, even when you don't have the collective voice, going back to how we started this, like standing up for Jesus, and by standing up for Jesus, you also stand up against injustice. I think there are many small things that maybe could happen even in the school now, that if you don't have a hashtag, even if no one sees it, it's just you and them. I want to challenge you, high schools out there, whoever your enemy is or the person who you have an issue with or whatever, like you're part of the problem. If you don't seek to squash that beef, if you don't seek to address that issue, like it's just you and them in the hallway, and you have every opportunity to walk in forgiveness, or, and you're like, hey, I'm gonna speak up about justice or Black issues. Like you're doing us a disservice to not reconcile with your brother and then say, I'm gonna pick up this big issue. In many ways, that's hypocritical. Like no one even wants to be part of that. And so, man, you have a bigger impact than you have a bigger audience than I as a person who's getting older, I'm young in some aspects, but old in this conversation. As a person who's getting older, to you high schoolers, I need for you Christians to stand up and do something, because this most recent Black Lives Matter movement was birthed outside of the church, not with Christians, right? The 1960s civil rights movement was birthed from the church, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, right? And there were a lot of faith overtones that came with that. Today, the race conversation is led by people who aren't followers of Jesus. And I think that's because the church has lost its influence. We've lost our witness in the world. We missed an opportunity to speak up on injustice. And now it's like churches have to say, am I for Black Lives Matter or not for Black Lives Matter? Now it makes the water murky when we were too scared to even speak up.
Yeah.
And it was a wide open opportunity to just say racism is sin.
Mm-hmm.
God hates racism. God hates racists. That's sin. And because we were silent on any of those Christian terms, what rose up? Black Lives Matter. And now that's the phrase people are getting behind. And now it's controversial in the church because we missed it. Yeah. So young people, I think it's wide open for you as followers of Jesus to jump in and to speak up.
Yeah, no, that's good. We've been having, I know that there's between staff and teachers and stuff like that, when we've been talking about approaching the issue, even among leadership and staff, there's questions about Black Lives Matter. Like, do we support Black Lives Matter? Do we not? Obviously we don't we don't like racism. Obviously we support Black lives, but the movement itself, I think it's really interesting to hear that you see that. I think that's a problem, like you said, a lot of church leaders, a lot of Christians are having, how do we support them and also support them without supporting everything that they support, maybe, or whatnot. So that's really interesting. James, we're almost done. I think I don't know how much time we've been on here. I've been looking for a clock, but I don't see it. But we've got to wrap up here in a second. But one of the things that I really appreciate about you is that you're very real, and you're genuine, and I think your faith is genuine and things like that. So I want to ask you, and hopefully this isn't way off topic or too personal, but I want to ask you a real genuine question.
Yeah.
You and I have talked about your relationship with your family, and you've got, especially I think with your sister, a really unique relationship. And the reason I want to bring that up is because it's really, I think, a hot topic in the world today. What's going on, I guess, in your sister's life. And I think our kids would do well, our students would do well to hear from you, like, how do you handle the situation? And I know I'm speaking in very vague terms, but just, will you talk a little bit about your family in general? And then like, just kind of talk about that and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so the sister that Tim's referring to, Pastor Tim, Director Tim, the sister that he's referring to is my sister who's a lesbian. And by lesbian, I don't mean like just like who's married to another woman. And you know, it's just like, all right, like how do we address that? So I'm a pastor, right? Follow Jesus. Tell other people to follow Jesus. We grew up in the same household, right? My dad is unsaved. My mom is saved. When she got saved, she started taking us to church regularly. If I was ever at my dad's house, I never went to church. Didn't want to go to church. I literally had, and by doesn't go to church, I mean, my dad is an atheist. He does not believe that anything happens when you die. He just goes to work. Like I don't know. I don't even know what he does. And so like, so the crazy thing that just happened, and like you and I talked about this. So at our church, we've been talking about every issue under the sun, every single issue under the sun. And this most recent time where I had to preach, homosexuality was like one of those topics. All right, so I'm gonna pause there. I have to address homosexuality, but my sister recently has gotten divorced, and is now dating another woman, another girl, right? Still lesbian, and they regularly start tuning into our church. COVID happened. It just shook up the world. And I think it's making her ask serious questions about life and life after death. And anyway, she's like, hey, you know, she'll text me, hey, what time is service? So anyway, all right, I'm gonna pick back up. So I have to address like same-sex attraction, homosexuality, lesbian, and all that. And the scriptures are clear like that. I mean, there's no one can make a meaningful case that that God has ever approved a same-sex relationship. There's no, you know, you like there's some gray areas about drinking. Can a Christian drink alcohol, whatever? Like there are many verses that address that. I'm trying to think of some other stuff, but same-sex attraction, there is no case at all. Old Testament doesn't matter. New Testament doesn't matter. So we had a sermon series that I taught, and I was talking about truth in a culture that really challenges us, that is full of lies and full of new ideas. Where at the end of me, like I taught for maybe like 30 minutes about, you know, just like how do we decipher truth? How do we engage the culture? How do we do these things? And once I finished, and I never do this ever, but I just really felt like I wanted to ask our church body, ask the congregation, if anybody has any question about anything that's culturally taboo right now, I want to let you ask it. And it was awkward. And I felt the awkwardness as soon as I said it, because it's one thing to be like, hey, you know, there are these issues, like how do we address like sexuality? How do we address legalizing marijuana? How do we address, do aliens exist? And it's like fun, we joke around, it's a cool topic. There's another thing to say, all right, ask the question right now. And so it got
You did that in
awkward.
your service? You did that in your service?
Did that in the service.
That's so bold.
Did that in the service. And so someone asked a question about the legalizing of marijuana, and then someone asked a question about same-sex attraction, right? But I know in the back of my mind, my sister is regularly tuning into this. And everything in that moment, Tim, made me want to, like downplay the truth for the sake of like, is this you? Like someone's messaging me.
It's not me.
Is that not you? Okay, it was another Zoom thing.
Sorry.
Are we serious? So
yeah,
everything in that moment made me want to be like, all right, how do I suppress the truth? So dangerous to say, but how do I suppress the truth so it makes her feel better? Right? How do I water down whatever message it is. And where did that come from? It really did come from a place of like, I really want her to know I love her. I want her to know that Jesus loves her. She's not defined by this. Either way, I had to speak truth and address it. And I mean, I said it more eloquently than this, but basically, yeah, I mean, like, the Bible calls that sin, but just like he calls other things sin too. And so the question was about like, the question was asked, I am mad that God has given me the desire for someone who is my sin. Like I'm a guy and God has given me the desires to like guys, or I'm a girl, God has given me those desires to like girls. And I'm mad at God that he's given me those desires while then also saying that it's sin. And the case that they're making is this idea of like, really great question, because what they're saying is like, I didn't choose to like vanilla ice cream. It's just part of what God gave me. If I like spicy food or if I don't like spicy food, it's just what God has given me. Or if I didn't choose whatever desire. I like the color blue. I like the color red. So they were saying, God gave me these desires. You know, I'm mad at you because now you say I can't engage in them. And so my response, and I hope it was well understood, was, hey, you with same-sex attraction, you aren't the only one who has desires. I have desires for other women who aren't my wife, that are desires on the inside of me. Just because I got married doesn't mean that I don't find other women attractive, or don't find other women's body parts attractive, or don't find whatever that case may be, right? But as a follower of Jesus, I have to realize I'm not defined by my desires, right? You would take that desire and say, therefore, I must be gay, or I must be a homosexual or a lesbian, or whatever term is politically correct. I mean, offend anybody. Instead, I must take these desires that I have and I just really filter them through the word of God and say, what is appropriate for me to have according to God's holy standard? What is inappropriate for me to have, right? And we have to have that truth that we filter through. Otherwise, what happens to the day when someone says, be mindful here. Like we all know it's wrong for someone who's like 80 years old to marry a 10-year-old. You just say it like that. We all know that that's wrong. But what happens to the day where we say, hey, just feel what you want? If it's your desire, like that's a dangerous day in our world for someone to say, well, I want to marry her. God must have given me those desires. Well, obviously we all see that as wrong, but what is going to be the litmus test to tell us it's wrong? It has to be the word of God, right?
Yeah.
It's the same with anything. This is the argument of relativity. It's like someone says like, hey, I like your house and your car, right? So it's my car. No, I like it. I want it. Those are my desires. Give it to me, right? Obviously it'd be wrong for you to give that to me, but what's going to be that standard? And so for us as followers of Jesus, that standard is the word of God. And so I want to tell them, you know, just because you have those desires, you don't have to be defined by them. You answer that to God's word. And then it also doesn't mean you got to marry. If you're a girl, doesn't mean you have to marry a guy. You can be single. And I feel like there's a lot of Christianese pressure to be like, no, if you're a girl, like men, you better like men, you better get married, and you better get married young. You know what? You could be single. Paul was single. Jesus was single. You know what I mean? Like just, you don't have to, succumb to that. So, more of the story, going back to my sister, it actually happened that they didn't tune in that week. And I was like, oh man, no conversation. But we've talked about it in great detail for several hours in one sitting. My sister and, my view, I'm a pastor, and how I believe the scriptures are pretty clear that it's sin. And she was mad at me. She hated me. And but we just try to keep loving on her. And we try to think about ways that are like just unconventional ways of just really showing love to her. And none of my family has ever visited her or stayed in her house once she started doing that. And so my wife and I were the first family members to just go visit her and her wife, sit at their dinner table, sleep in their house, and treat them like any normal human beings. For other people who I know who are engaging in sin, like I got uncles who are sleeping around and people who are drunks. Every time I see them, I'm not like, hey, by the way, you're a drunk. Hey, but it's just, they're just my family who don't know and walk with Jesus. I want to treat her the exact same way.
Yeah, that's really
it's
good.
Thanksgiving. How are you doing? It's Christmas. How are you doing? Can we visit you? So
yeah. So I was going to ask, do you think that's the solution, or that's the answer, with any of these disagreeable issues that we face, right? Whether it's sleeping around or homosexuality, or whether, we've got a family member who's addicted to drugs, or whatever it might be. Like, is that like how I as a Christian, how you as a Christian, how students as Christians, like the best way to respond is just in love and saying, look, like, I don't have to, just because I love them doesn't mean I have to, I guess, condone what they're doing and say it's good, but it's possible to like disagree and also show the love of Christ. Like, do you think we can do that? Like, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that there's been like a fear of Christians to like not love people well. And like, I think there's a fear to be like, well, what are they going to then think, whatever the case may be? I mean, I think you got to walk by faith, right? Trust the Holy Spirit. But I mean, let's take this same cultural issue and let's talk about Black Lives Matter. I think it's the same feeling. All right, I want to show Black people or people of color or any people who've been disenfranchised that I love them, right? And it might be under the banner of Black Lives Matter. And it's like, I'm nervous. Like, what are people going to say of me? And I think with that one, I've gotten it wrong personally when I've been like there's this, like, if I can call these scales like that are supposed to be equal, like 100%, it'll be like, as Christians, we're either like, no, I need to give them the truth, forget love. It's like, the truth is Black Lives Matter has people who are, whatever at the top, and they're socialists and they're Marxists and so therefore, I don't care about you, James. I can't agree. And so it's like, because I care so much about truth that I've missed just loving my neighbor. And I think those people have a fear that if you have so much love, you're going to forget the truth of the gospel. It's 100% truth and 100% love. I don't get to pick or choose which one I like, right? Jesus calls me and commands me to do both, right? So that Sunday, my sister's tuning in, or I think she's tuning in. I just think the enemy used it to just like really mess with my emotions in the head. But it was like, I have to speak the truth. But as soon as that truth is then spoken, I still love her. I still respond in love.
Yeah.
And now, truth be told, I mean, she could have seen it, and maybe she just didn't bring it up to me. But moral of the story, I have to speak the truth,
right? And
I have to walk in love. We don't get to pick or choose those as followers of Jesus.
Yeah, I think that's a really good explanation. Like, they're both like, they're not mutually exclusive, or they are mutually exclusive. Whatever, they go together. Yeah, I think that's.
Yeah, they go together.
Hey, we're almost out of time. Do you like? What is, just one last question here? Like, think back, whatever, to high school, wherever. Like, final words, right, to these high school students that you've never met, that you've never seen, that come from all over the world. Some are Christian, some are not. Like, if you were to leave one final thought, that you're like, man, I would love for you guys to remember this or to know this, what might that be?
Man, if you're a high schooler, right, and you're like really wrestling with your faith, following Jesus, all of that, I'd never look back over my high school life and thought, and like, as a follower of Jesus, like as an old man now, right? Never look back. And any time that I said I want to follow Jesus, I never regretted it. But there've been countless times when I followed the world, partying, underage drinking, any type of sex stuff, even if I'm not having sex. Like, I always like look back, and there is some regret to those things. But anytime I've chosen to follow Jesus, I never look back and have been like, man, I shouldn't follow Jesus that much. If anything, I should have done it more, because like, you really never know what type of impact you have on people. You never know how God is writing your story and their spiritual story, because you guys are interconnected. I've seen many of the people I went to high school with maybe not come to Jesus, but they've been coming to church and they've been coming to these faith gatherings. And a lot of them go back and say, man, in high school, James, you did this. And I'm like, me of all people? As like, I was terrible with that situation, got in the locker room, but there were other instances or opportunities where God just really used me, and you just never know. So I want to encourage you, risk it all for Jesus. I mean, why not? risk it all for, you're never going to look back and say, man, I wish I, would have, whatever, that was of the world. I would say risk it all for Jesus, and it's going to be just epic, so that be my final words.
All right, thanks. Hey, is there any, like, say, kids listening and kid says, hey, this guy James, he seems interesting or cool, or he's just kind of crazy, but I still want to know more about him. Like, could our kids, like, could they watch your church? Is there a way they could, like, watch you preach or something if they wanted to?
Yeah. So, I'll give out my email as well as our church. If you want to find us, our website is just HC3.life, LIFE, HC3.life. On there, you can get access to our, sermons, which are on Facebook right now. And then my personal email is just james@hc3.life. And check us out. I personally don't have a Twitter or Instagram or anything like that. I'm off of social media. But you can still connect with me via email. And hope to hear from you guys, and hope to come to Vienna at some point in time.
One of these days.
One of these days.
Post-COVID.
So 10 years from now, I'll be in Vienna. So.
Awesome. Thanks so much, James.
Yep.